How do you fight a war if you're not allowed to go to war with each other? That's an interesting question. And during the Cold War, that's a question we're going to have to answer. Of course, we have containment. I've already mentioned that in another video. And we have mutually assured destruction, also mentioned in another video or two. And so we don't really want to go to war with each other, but at the same time, we do want to go to war with each other, sort of. We want to prove to the world that the American system is better than the Soviet system. And our logic behind that is that if more countries see how awesome America is, they're not going to be swayed by the Soviet system and what the Soviet Union has to offer. And by the way, there's a lot of evidence that something like this worked. For example, and this is, of course, during the 1980s, but in the 1980s, a staunch communist by the name of Boris Yeltsin, he was one of the local leaders of Russia. He was actually the president of Russia, though he was not the leader of the Soviet Union. That was a man by the name of Mikhail Gorbachev. Anyway, so Boris Yeltsin came over to the United States as part of a diplomatic exchange thing. And President Ronald Reagan wanted to prove to the Soviet leadership and the Russian leadership that the American system was better than anything that they had in the Soviet Union. And so, how do you do this? Well, do you take them to Andrews Air Force Base and show them our bombers? No. Do you show them our missiles? The Russians had lots of missiles. The Russians had lots of bombers and fighters and nuclear everything, and so did we. And so he doesn't do it by showing off our military strength. Instead, he takes Gorbachev and he takes Yeltsin to a grocery store. Just a grocery store in downtown Annapolis. And they walk in, and he shows them, this is America. America is a land of prosperity. America is a land where people can walk in and they can buy as much milk or as much green beans or Spam as they want. And in his memoir, Boris Yeltsin said he knew at that moment that the American system was going to outlast the Soviet system and was superior to the communist system that he had always assumed was the best economic system in the world. Because even as president of Russia, even as being high up in the leadership of the Communist Party, he still could not buy all the milk that he wanted, or all of the chicken, or steaks, or fish. He had never seen so much variety of meat in one place. And here it is, it's not military officers, it's just people walking in off the street, normal people buying these things because they had plenty and they had choices. And so those sorts of battlegrounds are actually going to be phenomenally important during the Cold War. So I want to talk a little bit about some of those battlegrounds. I'm not going to mention Korea. I'm not going to mention Vietnam because those are more traditional battlegrounds. I want to mention the Olympics. Yes, the Olympics every 4 years. The Olympics are kind of like Iowa. Everyone loves you every 4 years and they ignore you the rest of the time. But yeah, that's what it's like to be an Olympian. But no, the Olympics becomes a substitute for combat. You see this especially in hockey, which the Soviet Union dominated the world hockey. The Soviet Union, their team were all, technically they were military officers, but they were actually professional hockey players. They trained year-round for playing hockey because they were so obviously, look at how of us, we are awesome because we're great at sports, and our Soviet system must be superior because we're producing better hockey players. And that's why the Miracle on Ice at Lake Placid was so important that Disney even made an awesome sports movie about it called Miracle. If you have not seen it, watch it. It is a wonderful film. All right, and basketball. The United States dominated basketball the same way that the Soviet Union dominated in hockey. And so, but everything, gymnastics, team sports, racing, everything Olympic became a competition to see which country could produce the best athletes, the best. And because in order to produce athletes, it's not just you have to have somebody who can run fast or jump high or whatever. You've got to have the infrastructure to train that individual to be the best athlete that that person could possibly be. And so this what became a way of showing off your abilities as a nation, your strength, your values, your infrastructure, your wealth, or whatever, right? And the Nene Lenape speaking people, the American Indians used to call the cross the little brother of war. And so, in a way, the Olympics become the little brother of war. And so they become a place where you can do battle, but the stakes aren't quite as high as a real battlefield. Again, there's a wonderful scene in the movie Miracle that really shows this as the American hockey team is going out to play the Soviet Union to see who's going to advance to the gold medal round. They're passing all these letters, and as they tap them, you hear voiceovers of the people who had supposedly written these letters. And they were all letters expressing support and patriotism and, just, hey, listen, we can do it because we're America and we can do anything. Even though we'd never beat the Soviet Union before, we're America, we could do this. Great movie, again, highly recommended. Another thing that comes into play for Battlefield is college campuses. United States realizing, of course, they already had the Servicemen's Readjustment Act. They're already paying soldiers to come in. And they come up with the ideas, you know what, we're going to bring in the best and brightest from these third world countries, these countries that are not part of the Soviet sphere and also not part of the American sphere. They are a third world. That's where that phrase comes from. That they're going to come in and the State Department is going to pay for their best and brightest to come to the United States and get educated. And in the process of learning engineering and history and literature and all those other things, they're going to learn how to be a great American. They're going to take part in America. They're going to go to those grocery stores. They're going to go to the beach. I don't know what they're going to do, but they're going to come in there and they're going to have such a favorable impression of America that when they go back to their home countries, be it India, Pakistan, Egypt, wherever, right? They go back to their home country. They're bringing in there, and they now, because of their education that they have received, they're now local, state, and even national leaders. They are going to be pro-America and not pro-Soviet Union. Soviet Union, by the way, is doing the same thing at their flagship University of Moscow. Their department, the Commissar, is going to be bringing in the best and brightest from the third world to educate there for the same purpose. We're gonna train some of the best Egyptian pilots at the United States Naval Academy. We're going to train some of the best Indian generals at West Point. We're going to train some of the best and brightest of all these countries in America to try to get them to be very pro-America. So, in a sense, the SAT, the ACT becomes substitute for combat, where people get to choose: are we going to be pro-America? Or am I going to be pro-Soviet Union? And that's going to be expressed by their college campuses and how they go to college and how they become educated. So we have the Olympics, we have college campuses, but the last one, and the one that I personally think is kind of fascinating to me, is space. I've always been fascinated with outer space, and to prove which country had the best military hardware, they do that by launching people into outer space. Yeah, people. We can't launch missiles up there because we launched like nuclear warheads. We started a war. So we put Yuri Gagarin, or the Soviet Union put Yuri Gagarin up there. We put Alan Shepard. Then we respond with John Glenn. And so it becomes what's called a space race. And the space race is these two great powers are launching rockets into space, and each one's trying to outdo the other. Look, we put a satellite in orbit. Oh, well, we do that too. Well, we put a person into space. Well, we put a person into orbit. We put a person into orbit more than once. We put a person into orbit 7 times. We go into outer space, and then our guys get out of their space capsules and float around in nothingness. Well, we send 2 people at a time, and it just escalates until the ultimate prize is the moon. Yes, the moon. The first country to reach the moon wins the race, kind of thing. And so the space race, President John F. Kennedy is going to make a great speech at Rice University where he says, we are going to go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. And we will do the hard things. And in the process of doing that, not only do we win the space race, we put a man on the moon, and then we do it again and again, and we bring them back safely, right? But we also, in order to support this, we invent weather satellites so that we can track weather patterns so that we don't have any unpleasant surprises when we launch or try to land our rockets. We make NASA. We make GPS satellites. GPS satellites were invented to support the space race. Weather satellites to monitor where clouds are and where hurricanes and tornadoes and things like this were invented to support the space race. And then other things. If any of you ever wear sunglasses, those were invented by NASA to support the space race. NASA has an interesting mandate to develop all this technology and then give it away for other people to develop into something economical. They don't keep any of the patents that they develop. And so as a result, they do things like, for example, they develop non-slip shoes, which are now pretty common in shoes for people to wear, like sneakers and stuff like this. They develop a little miniature pump to pump microscopic amounts of coolant to keep their satellites from overheating. And then someone says, you know what else that would be really good for? Pumping insulin. And so NASA takes that, they take that NASA invention and turn it into essentially an artificial pancreas. It's an insulin pump. And, and this is dozens of technology advances in American society are based on things that came about during the space race. This giantly better jet technology, better aerospace technology, better airplanes, better, I guess you'd even say better ways of training pilots. And so all of these things are developed as part of the space race to try to prove to the world that the American system is better than the Soviet system. So there you have it. We can't go to war. How do you fight a war if you can't fight the war? Well, you find other places. You go to the Olympics every 4 years. You bring the world to your college campuses. And then you go to outer space. And it's pretty out of this world to think about it. But all of those go back to the Cold War conflict and this idea that we can't fight directly because if we do, we destroy the world. Till then, I'll talk to you later.